Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rajan Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that NDA is fully committed to fulfilling the dreams and aspirations of people of the country. In an exclusive interview to Rajya Sabha Television, the Prime Minister said that for the 5 years, the focus was on meeting the needs of people, and the next 5 years will be spent fulfilling the dreams and aspirations of the people of India. He also said that India has emerged as a major global power during the last 5 years in a multipolar world scenario. The Prime Minister said that India believes in working with everyone for the good of all. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze India as a global player. Joining me on the program today are Sheel Sharma, former ambassador, and Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to both of you for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. How would you look at India as a global player over the last 5 years?
There are many indices which substantiate this claim. India is a member of most of the main global organizations. India is a member of SCO, it is a member of G20. India is, has had a very successful association with BRICS. Then India is also playing a major role in global issues like, climate change, which I consider one of the most burning issue of our times. India has taken a lead there. This International Solar Alliance, which Prime Minister himself has led, and we are now hosting a Secretariat of International Solar Alliance, it's a really far-reaching visionary action that India has taken. And its membership testifies to India's acceptability. 120 plus countries have joined it, they have ratified it. That shows that India's lead in this very crucial area of climate change has been taken by the world community. Then when you look at India's relationships, in the Middle East, India's relations with the Islamic world have really gone in a major way. Islamic Conference invited us, India for the first time as an observer, as a guest. And our foreign minister went, despite and in the face of Pakistan's opposition. That showed that the Islamic world sees India where it is. And then India's relationship with them, like with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with the Gulf countries, has really grown. And at the same time, India's relationship with Iran has also been on a very even track. So what is happening today, that India is self-confident, India is acceptable all over the world. India's Act East policy has drawn considerable milestones. So India today is now bidding for Security Council membership. Next year we will be hoping to get into Security Council, non-permanent seat.
Right.
Now this is again a new breach from the past, because after the 90s, we took considerable time to get back to even non-permanent membership of the Security Council, and we were there 2012 to 14, and within 6 years we are again in this. So this is another indication that people feel that countries feel that India should play a role in major organizations.
And at the world stage.
At the world stage.
Yes.
So, and then India's positions have been taken up by other countries. Like when we were not in Security Council, France and US and UK took our concerns, to the hilt. That is the question about terrorism and the attacks on India by the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hafiz al-Saeed and all that stuff.
Right.
So all that is taken up by others who feel one with India. So in that sense, we are today a much bigger player. We are not any longer the balancer and the diffident, constantly worrying, oh, let's not do this, let's not do this, not that.
Right.
India is confident and is taking a lead and taking action, and others accept it.
Sure. Professor, let me bring you to the picture now. I'm going to take a cue from what the ambassador just said, and then we'll take the discussion forward. He was talking about how we are close to the Saudis, we are close to the Iranians as well, something probably only India has been able to do in recent times, where, you know, we are friends with the foes and with the friends. I mean, that's how I'd like to put it. So how has India been able to strike a balance, do you think?
Well, this is, I think, has been an interesting aspect of Indian diplomacy over the last few years. And I would sort of trace it in some ways back to, you know, Mr. Modi's assertion to the diplomats, to his diplomats, that can India imagine a role for itself beyond a balancing role? You know, the idea, and therefore you see this idea then coming out of India being a leading player rather than a balancing player, and how, and I think this has been articulated repeatedly by successive, by two of our foreign secretaries, both Dr. Jaishankar and Vijay Gokhale, who have articulated that India, for example, no longer feels inhibited to say that India is a non-aligned country. We align with countries on on the basis of issues, and I think that is something which is very remarkable in the sense that again, not feeling shy or not feeling diffident about articulating your position, whether it is about on issues of global governance or whether it is on issues, as you talked about, in a particular region. So I think when you look at if you go back to the last G20 summit, there was this interesting imagery of Mr. Modi on the one hand having this trilateral with the Russians and the Chinese presidents, and on the other hand having this trilateral with the Japanese Prime Minister and American President. Two very different, you know, on the one hand he was talking about Indo-Pacific with the Americans and the Japanese, on the other he was talking about you know, economic globalization with the Russians and the Chinese. And I think that in some ways is symptomatic of the larger trend in Indian foreign policy, that we are certainly in a privileged position at this point where countries want to befriend us, and we are also reaching out to those countries, not being diffident like in the past, but also articulating our own positions on key issues and making sure that those positions are heard, and our friends and supporters help us in making sure that those positions become operational on the global stage. So I think we have seen this across issue areas, we have seen this across regions. And as you know, in the particular, for example, when you talk of Middle East, this has been one of the fantastic success stories of the last few years. Right. Where you can sort of manage your relations with Iran, at the same time enhance your ties with countries like Israel and Saudis and UAE and Bahrain. So I think this is something that perhaps at this point in time in global history only India can do, because very few other countries have the kind of the space that India has today, and the kind of the relationships that they have with other countries, the way India enjoys at this particular point. So I would feel that India is very privileged. I don't know whether this privileged situation would last, but certainly India has been in a position where it has articulated a new role for itself and has pushed forth with some degree of determination in terms of operationalizing that role. Right. So in one word, we can say goodwill really across the world for India. Let me introduce on the program now Dr. Harinder, Sekhon, Senior Fellow, Vivekananda International Foundation. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on Rajya Sabha TV. You know, we're discussing about how there is tremendous goodwill really as far as India is concerned in the Middle East, how the Saudis and the Iranians seem to be close to India at this point in time. But the same is the case with the superpowers as well, isn't it? I mean, at some point in time, you know, there were several commentators who believed that India was going or sliding too much towards the United States. But we have struck a balance with Russia as well.
Absolutely. And I think this has been one of the mature things about Indian diplomacy and Indian foreign policy which has come about. But firstly, when the new government assumed office in 2014, people thought that the relationship with the US would not go the way it has under Prime Minister Modi. And then there was this feeling amongst the Russians that they still feel that we have tilted too much towards the United States. I've recently returned from Moscow, and there is once again great deal of positivity as far as India-Russia relations are concerned, because Moscow has once again emerged as the biggest supplier of weapons to India, and they feel satisfied and they feel that their position is very secure. And also the manner in which India was able to negotiate with the United States over the purchase of S-400s from Russia and kind of tell the US that sanctions would not make, the threat of sanctions would not let India, would not force India to change its policy vis-a-vis Russia. So I think both countries respect us for the stance we have taken, for the very frank manner in which we engage with both of them. But this does not mean that we should become complacent and rest on what we have achieved so far. Because with the United States also, strategically we may be moving forward, but in the economic sphere there are a number of challenges. And this is where I think the US expects us to do a little bit more. Because with the US and with Russia, with none of the big powers, there's going to be any free lunches. Both would want to extract the maximum. If they are giving India the importance which India has got in the on the world stage, we would also need to give that much back, walk the talk, and give that much back to the relationship with both the United States and with Russia.
Right. So that having been said, Ambassador, let's take this aspect of the discussion forward. What is it that India can give the United States and Russia, and how do we ensure that we too have a place at that superpower table?
Well, the first thing which one should realize is that India today has been very pragmatic. The global situation is crisis-ridden. And this kind of a crisis-ridden situation, India has shown considerable nimble-footedness. We are careful. At the same time, when it comes to our interest, we are taking a foot forward. Then we are not weak anymore, so we are able to put our strength forward. So with that kind of a strength, like in the economic field, they are saying now everyone accepts the largest, fastest growing economy, and the indices that India has today, the macro indices, they are acknowledged by everyone. So we are able to, when we buy weapons from Russia, we are buying it. When we buy weapons from the US, we are buying it. It's not, transfers on some kind of concession. Then on trade issues also, we are able to put our point of view with clarity, and the other side accepts it. So I would say that there is a certain dynamism in our foreign policy and our trade and economic relations, where we are taking issues forward, and there is no hidebound, static, inertial attitude in all aspects. So US, Russia, even China, they all find that India's role is a factor for stability. India is not out to create any stir or turbulence in any place. Wherever we are going, we are planning, trying to do things which stabilize. So this factor of having a stabilizing approach in all our interactions is acknowledged and is realized by our interlocutors.
Right.
That itself is a very good thing. That is it's a value added, you see, which so I mean that's why you find two other ends, like you have our Prime Minister getting feted by UAE with a special award in the name of Sheikh Zayed, and from Moscow, Putin is giving Prime Minister Modi the highest Russian award. Now, so they are different. They have a different outlook, but they see India in their outlook as very valuable.
Right. Right. Definitely, they see India as very valuable. But how seriously do they take India, and can India really influence matters on the world stage, Professor?
Well, I think we are getting, we are moving towards a situation where most global issues require Indian intervention. And I think at some level, India has to prepare itself for that. And I think what is interesting about the last 5 years is that Mr. Modi has done a good job of preparing that conversation with the external interlocutors as well as with the domestic audience. So I think, there is today a vast degree of interest in what foreign affairs means. I mean, if you talk to the youth, they're very interested. There is a discussion around Mr. Modi's travels, etc., etc. And I think that has generated this discussion about the future trajectory of Indian foreign policy, which is, I think, a very important conversation to have domestically, because after all, only once we decide where we want to go can we leverage that in our international engagements. So I think he has done that very well. So Ambassador earlier on talked about climate change. Now, climate change is one of the most fascinating examples you find over the last few years. You know, we were gradually moving towards a position where, from being a naysayer to the climate change discussions, we were trying to become more engaging in those debates, or a more productive for a more productive engagement. And it was, sort of shaping up in a certain direction. India was changing gradually its stance. But what Mr. Modi, I think, did very effectively was to shift the discourse from this being a Western-led approach to this being something that is endemic to Indian cultural ethos, for example. And I think that changed the whole conversation. Now no one talks about that this is being forced on India, and this is something that India will have to do under duress. I think the conversation is now what India can do for climate change. And I think all of his initiatives, whether it's solar initiative and other bilateral initiatives that have emerged out of this engagement, are born out of that sort of realization that this is something that India needs to do, and not because someone else is telling India to do, but because it is in Indian interest, and it is in Indian interest because we have been doing it for a very long time. So I think the way he has prepared India for a certain kind of a future foreign policy engagement is very, very interesting. And at the same time, as I think again was pointed out, his engagement with the external interlocutors have been equally productive, because there he has been able to convey a degree of seriousness in our global engagement that others now perforce have to take us seriously. So we have talked about climate change, but if you look at the debate on terrorism, it's very interesting. Debate on terrorism is now almost coalesced around India. So we have countries which are now, taking the position that India at one point wanted the world community to take. But we have been successful now in conveying that. Similarly on BRI. This is, if you look at that conversation, India was an outlier at one point in time when it came on stage. Today, if you read the Western statements, they're lock, stock and barrel what India's initial statement was, the kind of concerns they are raising. So I think India has been able to shape some of those normative and ideational issues around which global discourse resolves in a very, very pragmatic manner. And I think that is where perhaps the domestic and the external have been bridged by this government.
Right. So, that having been said, Dr. Harinder Sekhon, so what are the challenges really as far as India's foreign policy is concerned?
I get back to, I think I ended off where you brought up the question about what India needs to do to engage with the big powers. And I think this is where we need to step up, firstly, our economic engagement. For that, we would need to first set our own house in order. We've taken very good steps on digital economy, the ease of doing business, make in India. Now, these are still, they are still at the nascent stage and very much works in progress. And if we can kind of further improve our performance in these areas, because both Russia and the US are looking at greater economic engagement with India. And here we need to safeguard, of course, our own domestic market, but at the same time we know we need the FTA, we need to modernize, we need the scientific inputs, we need the technology. So we need to really work very hard to create the right environment to get these people interested. For example, the Russians have a very robust pool of scientists, and because of the state of their economy, they have actually floated the ideas of setting up centers of excellence in our IITs. So I think this is the level of engagement which, wherever we can, we need to encourage these kind of engagements more at, it need not be big ticket announcements all the time, but if we can involve more educational institutions, people to people, and build up this whole ecosystem where things lead to the bigger deliverables. So in the economic and technical sphere is where India needs assistance, and we need to further streamline our own processes and have a system in place once the election is over. I think one needs to identify key areas and move things forward. Also, when it comes to the United States, I mean, India has been able to tell both that the way other countries, big powers, act in their own interest. We are not shy in telling anyone else anymore that India too looks at its own long-term interests. And this is where I think we've been able to send a very robust and right message to both the United States and Russia and even China. I mean, the Chinese also have a great deal of respect, but I think at the same time we need to use this, in the economic sphere we need to be more strategic in our thinking and leverage what we do in the strategic field to our own advantage. I mean, we have to capitalize on this rather than being seen as a fence setter in international relations. And this is going to be the next step or the next challenge as far as Indian diplomacy is concerned. You have to really deliver on what you promise or is expected of you. And we really need to move ahead before, like we are, I think it was said earlier, that we are in a very enviable position. We are lucky that everyone sees the promise of engaging with India, and India is seen as a very positive factor in stabilizing the world. And I think we need to really raise our stature further and deliver on what is expected of us. And the first thing is to get ourselves strengthened domestically.
Right. All right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Ambassador. Couple of issues, of course. One, we need to focus on our domestic issues first if we need to concentrate on what's happening internationally, is what the previous panelists said. And also with the elections, we are in election mode right now. The elections are currently underway. Is that going to change, the election results going to change in how our foreign policy goes going forward?
No, there is a momentum which has been built in the recent years. And that momentum is going to continue to take India forward. But I think I will pick up one point which Harinder made, and I want to, extol it. And that point is that in our challenges, we must move forward on technology, because that is going to be the key factor in the shaping of the coming decades. And somehow or the other, despite our commitment to technology, we have been slow in. We have to put more money there. We have to put more resources in technology, and make sure that this vast human resources that we have, they are coherently and in a kind of a synergistically directed, so that we reach and achieve our aims. This is very important. Our individuals can do many things, and you find variegated examples of our success in technology, right from Mangalyaan to successes in biotechnology, in nuclear, and ASAT and space and everything. But we need to have a coherent strategy and work on this. This is the challenge before us, and the global situation is positively oriented towards us. So,
right.
So we bring to the world a positive sum game. We are the message from Delhi is a positive sum game. We are not out to hoodwink or rook anyone. We just want to work our way out. So,
right. So that should be the focus, is what you're suggesting. Technology, really, deliverables also is another suggestion that is being made. Professor, what should our focus areas be going forward?
Well, clearly, I think, as has been pointed out, one has to build, India's domestic economic base, military base, technological base. And I think there, irrespective of whichever party comes to power, will shape the trajectory. We'll have similar outlook on what needs to be done, or should have, ideally, in an ideal world. I would also add that I think leadership matters. So the fact that this Prime Minister was so positively engaged in foreign policy has meant some good things for India. It has given India the kind of profile that perhaps many in India would have had wanted. So I think, again, whoever comes to power will have to see that that profile does not diminish, because it has its own advantages. But clearly, unless you build the domestic sources of your power, it will only take you so far. And I think at this point, when the international environment is so positively framed in your favor, it would be a tragedy if we do not really galvanize our domestic resources. And I think I would agree. Technology, I would actually take it a step down, and I would say the knowledge base of this country needs to be restructured. We really need to focus on the sources of our knowledge. How are we training our youngsters? If the youth dividend is to be really taken into account, then what is the kind of education and training we are imparting them so that we are making them productive partners in India's journey towards what we all would like to see, a status of a major power in the global hierarchy.
Right. And Harinder, Sekhon, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think there's a continuity in Indian foreign policy and even domestic policy which we witnessed over the last 20 years. So any change of government is not going to change the trajectory which we've adopted. But having said that, I think the other two panelists have also taken up the thing about technology. So we really need to focus on our youth, education, skill development, and employment opportunities for the youth, and the right kind of employment opportunities for India really to emerge as a global power, the kind of image we are seeking for ourselves in the world today.
All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.